I'm the Honourable Dr. Brian Walker.
Thank you, Acting President. I was earlier sitting in the chair and came out earlier because I was surprised that so few people had actually stood to speak to this debate initially. There was not great enthusiasm on this side of the chamber for actually initially speaking, and I wonder if that might have something to do with the fact that not many uteruses are present on this side. I would assume so. I need to thank the Health Minister for bringing this forward because I think it's entirely timely and appropriate and right. Now, I'm going to be speaking today not just as a politician but also as a practical doctor, someone who's actually dealt with this at the sharp end. Now, I thank those who have given searing testimony as to their own experiences, what they have gone through. And I feel humbled that despite all that, we are not despised, we males, for all that we have done to make life worse for a good half of our population and continue, in some cases, to do so. So thank you for your mercy. I do have a vested interest here, I must say, in this conversation because apart from not having a uterus, I am actually an active GP who does deal with women who come to me with quite serious problems. Among them, of course, the question here of coming in and that gentle voice when they're saying, I have missed my period. And there's a pause and a silence. And I've got to divine in that moment, is this a planned pregnancy or an unplanned pregnancy? Is this a wanted pregnancy or an unwanted pregnancy? Because it is very difficult for someone coming in to broach this with a strange man, although I may be the doctor for some considerable time, but I'm not her partner. I'm not a relation. The relationship I have is one of someone who gives health advice, counselling, but I don't share a house with them. So the personal insights that I have from my own life, my own experiences, or my practical experience actually counts for little at that very moment, when they're basically asking themselves, can I trust this man to help me? And I find it sad in this day and age that still that is the case. So I wanted to reassure you, this is actually my practical experience. This is not theory. This is what I deal with on a regular basis even now. Now, abortion may be legal, and I do thank Cheryl Davenport for what's been done, and my respect to all who have actually campaigned on this. It's vital. I do recall in my early days as a young doctor the distress, because in that case it was always illegal getting an abortion. And the women who had terrible troubles. I do recall dealing with this when I was actually in obstetrics and gynecology, women who had actually tried to procure their own abortion, the terrible troubles they had in staying alive. So it's legal just now, but is it also equitable? Are we having a situation where women can walk in and feel comfortable at all times in dealing with a doctor, male or female? And the recognition that it is not as easy as we would have hoped. Now, I have worked, of course, in remote and rural communities where we do not have anything much in the way of specialist support, where it may be a long flight to get to someone who could actually help with this case. Dealing with all the conditions at that local remote site where we have cultural issues, where we have religious issues, where we have moral personal judgments, which make it difficult for a woman to then board an RFDS flight to go and get the help that she needs. And every hurdle that we put in their way is a slap in the face of all female existence. Now, in my experience, I have dealt with, I can't count how many women who have been in this situation, can't count it. I can probably count on the fingers of one hand the number of women who have come in and not cared that they're pregnant, they just want an abortion because that's their alternative to contraception. On the fingers of one hand over 40 years. Every woman I have dealt with has seen this as a major problem, a major concern. It is not something undertaken lightly at all, ever. So hurdles are in place, and that's unacceptable, totally unacceptable. These could be self-imposed hurdles. I feel somehow that the woman may say, this is my fault. Because people who are oppressed often try to blame themselves for things which are happening by an outside source. And this, again, is unacceptable. It might be imposed by society. One thing I found particularly difficult in dealing with is the idea that someone's moral values could be applied to someone else. Your moral values apply to yourself and to no one else but yourself. So the idea, oh, she has been engaged in premarital sex, therefore this is her punishment from God, or something that's in that order. Intolerable things to actually hear in this day and age. But that might be applied in certain conditions in our society. It's totally unacceptable. This is, well, in my view, this is a woman's choice and a woman's choice alone. But not alone. It should actually be happening with a good partner. One of the problems is you may not have a good partner. You may have someone who's been abusing you, violating you, someone who is oppressing you, domestic violence. There may be terrible things happening at home about which you have not yet communicated because you are trying to keep things together. You're trying to protect yourself. You're trying to stay safe. You're trying not to rock the boat in case you get another beating. And you can't tell the doctor in case he tells your partner. Yes, I've experienced that. You need a good partner to support you because this is a vital thing. Being alone going through this, difficult as it is, being on your own, unsupported, is really hard. You need a good general practitioner, someone who listens, someone who cares. And I have to say, I'm desperately sad to say, not every GP is of that calibre. And of course, you need a good specialist who can help you through the final stages of accessing an abortion. So, apart from your partner, apart from your GP, apart from the specialist, no one else ought to be involved. And that goes for any aspect of government. Government has no place in your bedroom. It's got no place in your consultation with a doctor. The government has no place at all in describing what you may or may not do when you're consulting with a health professional. It's not your business, government. It's not your business, other people. It's not your business, neighbours. No one's business but the woman. And she takes that step in coordination with hopefully a good partner, hopefully a good general practitioner, and certainly with a good specialist. So these self-imposed hurdles, they can be addressed. We need to discuss early pregnancy, and we need to discuss what happens at that moment when a woman comes in and says, I have missed my period. Now, it's true that 1 in 10 pregnancies do not progress because of failure to progress. So there may be a missed abortion or a miscarriage. Now, I do recall vividly the Leader of the House asking, where haven't I worked? I have worked in an early pregnancy loss unit. Now, you might think that's fairly okay, just early pregnancy loss unit. I had women coming in who had hoped for, desired, a much-loved pregnancy, but who now had vaginal bleeding and were at risk of losing that dearly loved pregnancy. And when they did have to go to a surgical completion of a miscarriage, the utter devastation they experienced was of bereavement. They had lost someone in their lives, the equivalent of losing a partner or losing a parent. That sense of bereavement, that grief, was just as valid, just as vivid as you had lost someone close to you of a close family member. The only problem was that no one else understood that. Not even the partner. Not even the partner, because for us, you see, seeing our partner, our loved one going through that, okay, here, we'll fix you through this, it's sorted, there's all sorted, no bleeding, there's no retained products of conception, you're all good now, let's go home and rest and take it easy. But what we don't appreciate is that you're having a bereavement, you're experiencing grief. This is how important it is when a woman comes to me asking that she needs to have a termination. She might well experience that grief, or she might not. But it's important that she be allowed to express that and have the appropriate treatment for that. Losing a baby is hard. Choosing to lose a baby is hard, no matter what you're going through. And I admire those who can manage that without needing help. I've not seen a lady yet who takes that step easily. And even that small number who do, there's nothing we can do about that. But it's very, very small numbers. Like I said, finger of one hand over 40 years that I can say this. Now, we've got Complicating this, of course, are personal religious views. This has to be taken seriously. We cannot say that your views are not valid. When someone comes into me as a doctor, they can say the most outrageous things. They can criticize me by saying, you're not a believer, therefore you're going to go to hell. And I've had people trying to proselytize in the practice, telling me how to turn to Jesus to save my eternal soul, as I'm trying to get their blood pressure sorted. Because they firmly believe that any soul unclaimed by their particular brand of Christianity is doomed to a horrible eternity. And I understand that, and I respect that. My personal opinion is that a God who does that to other people is not a loving God. So when you talk about a loving God, I beg to differ. Your idea is not my idea. I'm not going to criticize you. I'll keep my mouth shut, because I'm not going to impose my views on you, even if you're imposing your views on me. And the same thing should be true of every woman who comes to me asking for help, whatever that help may be. I do not impose my moral views. I've heard of doctors, colleagues of mine. This is some years back, mind you, when a woman comes in, or let's say a 14-year-old girl comes in saying, I need contraception. And then this, oh, my dear, you shouldn't be having sex at 14. I'm going to tell your parents it's all wrong. You can't have contraception. How dare you? How dare you condemn a sexually active young woman to the possibility of pregnancy because of your own moral views you're imposing on someone else? You don't belong in that practice. Get out. You're not fit to be a practitioner. Because it's not your job to proselytize. It's your job to care for this human being. And we have enough of that in this country. And I've seen enough of that. And yes, I hate it. It's unacceptable. And any evidence of that should be called out and removed. And this law will, I hope, give power to those who wish to stand up for the rights of women to have the treatment that they need, without hurdles being imposed by me or government. So we've got societal hurdles, the religious hurdles, the moral, the ethical hurdles. They apply to the individual, not to anybody else. So if you have a particular religious view that says, I cannot have an abortion, I will work with that. There's plenty that we can do to help you through your difficult time. But if, on the other hand, you say, listen, despite that, I'll be hated by my community, I still need to go for an abortion, I will help you. And so should every conscientious doctor, because it's not about the others, it's about you. My advice should be for you, not for your community. And this is true of every doctor. We should be caring for the individual, no matter what their backgrounds, no matter what their personal views, or my personal views. My job is to give you the best medical advice I can, not to impose my beliefs on you. So, that's the first port of call, coming in to see me. I need to help you, not impose my particular views. I have to tell you, my own personal views, I will confess to you right now, I do not like abortion. I don't know many doctors who do like abortion. It's just not something that I'm comfortable doing. But it's not my life. I would far prefer to have the option of having a child, bringing it into a loving family, a caring, loving family. That's the ideal. But the ideal is not always possible. The last death that I saw, a young mother of 14 who bled to death at an airport in the remote regions here. 14. That breaks my heart. This should not happen. We don't need more hurdles. So, this could be a failed contraception. There's plenty of ways of contraception failing. One is forgetting a pill. Antibiotics is a very good way of actually preventing the contraceptive from working. Other medications can also be taken which reduce the uptake of the pill. It can be a failed relationship. You have had a loving relationship, and then all of a sudden your partner discovers that you're now pregnant. And all of a sudden a tidal wave of responsibility comes upon the man who says, I can't take this, I'm out of here, I'm going to leave you alone, unsupported, abandoned. And the woman is left bereft. What do I do? Not only have I lost my partner, I've lost my future, I've got the child to care for, I've got no job, no prospects here. What am I going to do? The panic, the fear, also the guilt. It could be an assault, and that's very, very common. Something that we men fail to recognise is how often women have been assaulted, physically and mentally. Happens all the time, and most often it is not mentioned because we'll keep our head down, we'll pretend it's not happened, carry on. I don't know of a single woman who hasn't been assaulted in some way or another. And then, of course, there was an unplanned pregnancy, the idea about having a childbirth. That's a huge, huge responsibility. I don't know of a single parent in this world who has, not at one time or another, wanted to kill their child. Because children are very difficult to raise. And doing that in very difficult social circumstances with an unwanted, unplanned pregnancy is asking such a lot. Can we give support in the community? Yes, we can. Is that the only option? No. When you then find a young woman who has a pregnancy which is unwanted and she carries on with that, it may put her relationship at risk. It puts her personal health at risk. It's never easy carrying on with the pregnancy, even if it's desperately wanted. But people do, because it is desperately wanted. The abortion as a procedure is, of course, either medical or surgical. Now, the medical one, as described, is actually very simple. What irritates me boundlessly is the facility with which a government can prevent a healthy treatment being given for how many decades? Because why were we not following the example of France? We see this not just with abortion, but with a lot of other medicines. I will divert into cannabis. How is it that we are unable to see the science of, say, the US or Canada or Germany? We've got to do the same questions again and again and again, so deferring our ability to allow a medicine into our society because we need to actually just be certain about that. So we're not going to take someone else's experience. This happened with mifepristone. This happened with that very safe, healthy approach to terminating a pregnancy. Why did we forbid it? Why did we prevent it? Why did the women allow it? So I digress now to look at America, the USA, where we're now seeing a catastrophe, a social catastrophe, in how they are reversing the Roe versus Wade, how they're assaulting women. And what irritates me boundlessly and makes me amazed is how women, a large part of their society, allow it to happen. And I thank the women in Australia that it is not allowed here. Show the way. Now, as pointed out before, we've looked at in the USA, they said in certain places, no abortion after 6 weeks. I have yet to find a woman who knows she's pregnant before 6 weeks. You need that much time to find your period is missing. It may be just the abnormal changes in your menstrual cycle, and all of a sudden it's gone, and a bit of tenderness in the breasts, a bit of nausea. Oh, I might be pregnant. So the pregnancy test comes back, and it's positive. 6 weeks is long gone by then, usually. But early pregnancy, we could actually do termination. 9 weeks is probably a good time for that, very safely with the mifepristone. I've forgotten the number for it. I don't use that number. It should be more easily available. It will be more easily available. And this is what the legislation is going to allow. Healthcare practitioners, not just doctors, but nurse practitioners, midwives. The bill will assist in making this easier to access for all women. That can only be good. The surgical approach is, it could be a suction termination of pregnancy in the early pregnancy. But for the later pregnancies, it's going to be just inducing delivery. Now, let's get into a bit of graphic detail about this. An abortion at 23 weeks is going to be producing something which looks like a baby. It's formed. After 24 weeks, we might begin to consider the pregnancy is viable outside of the womb. But in my experience, and again I'm speaking just as a general practitioner, those children born very, very, very preterm, if they do survive, always, I'll rephrase that, very often have significant health issues which persist with them throughout their lives. For a dearly loved pregnancy, that would be acceptable if you're prepared to look after your child. At 23 weeks, that is not a viable child. It simply is not. I'll give you the example of a child which was born from an embryo which was 23 years old. If you took a 23-week-old pregnancy and froze that as you would an embryo, that would die. Because we cannot survive, but an embryo can. So we're looking here at the difference between an early pregnancy and a later pregnancy, and understanding that there's a kind of a grey zone where there may be the possibility of a very disturbed life. That's after 24, 25 weeks. I think 26 weeks is where I would place that. And that's a lot of effort. So the concept of 23 weeks, I think, is very appropriate. You could even say 24 weeks, but 23 weeks has been agreed as a sensible time. So we're going to be delivering now what looks like a baby. And that child, if is not given that injection beforehand, will be born, possibly, alive, but not able to live. I, like you, have had numerous emails from people who have demanded that we then give all help to that 23-week-old unborn or recently born child, which cannot survive. And the implication is that I or my medical colleagues are somehow going to happily let a human life expire without treating it. Seldom have I been so insulted by the public. Seldom have I been accused of not caring for human life. That can only come from a place of ignorance. And those who choose not to have the injection to actually terminate that child before it is passed, then have the opportunity of caring for that possibly dearly loved child, possibly malformed child. You'd only want to really terminate at 23 weeks if there was a major problem, like, for example, anencephaly, like, for example, absent kidneys, like, for example, major malformations which make it incompatible with life, and is probably the only reason why you'd really want to terminate that child. It is not because you want to choose the sex. It is not because you've decided, I'm not going to have this child anymore. It is because there is a problem with that pregnancy. And forcing women to carry that child then to term is actually an assault against very humanity. And I would, maybe I'm being too graphic for you, but this you have to hear from the doctors who actually do this type of procedure. That is an assault on humanity and should not be tolerated. And what I see happening in the USA shall not happen here. Shall not happen here. You can maybe sense my anger. The anger that I experience because we have women being subjected to non-uterine decisions. I've just coined that word, haven't I? Non-uterine decisions that determine how you are going to manage your body. That's an insult to all women and should be rejected immediately. Now, this bill, I'm sure, will be very helpful in allowing women to plan and to manage their own wellness, and I support every single aspect of this bill. I could talk for a long time about this. Termination of pregnancy remains a huge stress for all. So the plea I would make is, do not make it worse. The decision should always remain between a woman and her specialists, medical practitioners, whether doctor, midwife, nurse practitioner. It's their business, no one else's. We have the example here of conscientious objectors. I've spoken about this already. The idea that I could then determine what someone else does based on my morals or my ideas, wrong. Wrong. What I need to do if I disagree with something is say, I'm terribly sorry, I'm unable to help you, but I know someone who can. And that is the way to do this. And this is what we're seeing just now. I gave the same example about the oral contraceptive pill. If you're not prepared to prescribe, tell the girl, but then send her to someone who does. Not your business what that someone does in their lives. You must help. Pass on to the relevant person who can help. But at the same time, we also have legislation provision here that you cannot be forced to do something with which you disagree. This is entirely right and proper. It's freedom on both sides. The question was here made about maturity. And again, I get very angry about this. The concept that you may be not mature enough to make a decision about the termination, but you are mature enough to carry this child into pregnancy, to the end of the pregnancy, is stupid. Who's going to say that an 11-year-old girl now needs to carry the baby to pregnancy because she's not mature enough to accept the termination? In what planet are you existing? How dare we assume a child can give birth, become a mother, and then go back into, what, grade 7 is it? Because they weren't mature enough to have a termination, because their parents decided, nope, she's going to have the baby, she's going to suffer the consequences of having unplanned sex, therefore she's going to become a mother. I think that's very irresponsible. And it leads me to another problem I have, just the last one I've got to mention here. The idea of sexual activity seems to be a major problem for those who've got some moral ideas. I do recall, I'll tell you a story in a church some many years ago, when the pastor had been caught having illicit sex with one of his parishioners. And the debate was, do we want to sack this pastor and send him home, send him packing because he's had illicit sex? And all these conversations were had. And I asked the congregation, I said, I'd like you all, each one of you men, this was men, look one to the right, one to the left. They did that. Each one of you, I said, has seen at least one person who's had the same sin. Would you rather have someone who is a sinner and can lead you in the paths of righteousness or not? They would rather have had a murderer as a pastor than someone who'd had illicit sex with a parishioner. I found that so mind-boggling that it caused me to reframe entirely how I look at that community. And still, I will bear that thought. Those who stand with moral ideas really are the ones who have the most problems. I can think of all these pictures of the drag queens were saying, we're going to assault our children. Actually, it's the pastors, it's the scoutmasters, it's the ones who are thought to be the most moral are the ones that we ought to be more careful about. So this whole idea about us having a judgment about other people's activity in the bedrooms and what happens after that really has no place in anybody's consideration. It's just the person with the health practitioners. And for that, this bill absolutely fits the needs of the community. I cannot support it more. And I will do so. And anyone who wishes to discuss it with me in private, over a gin, I can happily explain why I am so thankful that the bill has been brought forward. My apologies to all womanhood that this has to come this far, and I wish the bill well and thank all who have helped to create it.